Hamzat Lawal, the founder and chief executive officer of Connected Development, is joining us from New York right now. Hello, Hamzat, and welcome to the program.
Hi, Nancy. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. Sorry I had to wake you up. You know, it's quite early there. You should still be asleep now, but thank you. Thank you for joining us. Now, Hamzat, of course, you are in New York. Tell us what has really been the reception to President Tinubu. This is his first address at the General Assembly, of course, as Nigeria's president and as ECOWAS chairman, as it were, amid the crisis in ECOWAS and all of that. Tell us what the reception has been like and how are people taking President Tinubu's address?
The reception for Nigerian delegates led by President Tinubu has been really positive. I know he has had bilateral conversation with different world leaders on the sideline of the General Assembly. He has met with private sector leaders. He's also engaged the community here in New York, so people in diaspora and other delegates in New York. And his speech has been welcomed positively. His address to world leaders were very powerful. They were very clear. There was no ambiguity. He spoke not only for Nigeria, he spoke for the West African region and spoke for other African leaders. His speech was, very powerful and very concise. First, he started by laying, the foundation of various issues that have been definitely Nigeria, the continent around, military junta taking over democratically elected powers. He also spoke about climate change, the impact of climate change, and how world leaders have failed to keep their promises. You remember the outcome of the Paris Agreement said, world leaders, particularly the global north, will commit $100 billion annually, and this pledge has not been put forward. He also spoke about how we can build stronger institutions, because tying it to the theme of the General Assembly that looks around, rebuilding back trust using public institutions and also mobilizing effort around global solidarity. He talked about how can we ensure that democratic governments are put back in some of this, in all of these countries, particularly in the West African region where he chairs ECOWAS. The president also talked about the current hardship in Nigeria, knowing that, saying that, yes, he had to take those bold steps to remove fuel subsidy and ensure a new regime of effects and understand the implication of the people in Nigeria. But he has to put this so that in the long run, we can enjoy economic growth. He also said Nigeria is ready for business. Is the world ready to do business with us? And with this kind of speech, he's saying that, bring the foreign direct investment. He talked about agriculture. He talks about security.
So
He talks
Hamzat,
about,
let me come in here if you can hear me. With all of this you're saying, of course, we saw President Tinubu in India. Just as he came back, he proceeded again to the United States. Do you think that the rest of the world is taking us seriously at this point? That's one. The second question also is, in his speech yesterday, he did mention the failure of good governance in Africa, unfair treatment and undue exploitation of Africa and, of course, its resources. But do you think that there is also this sentiment around if Africa or if President Tinubu is pointing a finger at the rest of the world as it is in terms of unfair treatment, in terms of undue exploitation from the rest of the world, the remaining four fingers are pointed at us in the terms that what can we do for ourselves? There's nobody that can really bail the cat. You're taking a look at even West Africa, where he's the chairman of ECOWAS. We have a lot of sit-tight leaders. For example, in Cameroon, the man has been there. He doesn't want to go away. He's still leading. He leads Cameroon, perhaps from Switzerland, and perhaps other African countries where you have sit-tight leaders. So what does that really portend? Is President Tinubu not also talking tongue-in-cheek, especially in that paragraph? I can't remember, either 5 or 6, the 6th paragraph, where it said failure of good governance. And I'm wondering, President Tinubu, which kind of good governance? Where in your own continent, good governance is still something we're seeking for.
So again, now, I think that he's now taking cognizance and recognizing the fact that we must have this very difficult conversation. Because for him to even say this publicly at his first ever General Assembly, it means that we must have those difficult conversations. So from the outcome of, or from the aftermath of the Second World War, a pact was put together for European countries to build back better and attract a prosperity for their country and their people. We've not seen that for Africa, for instance. So the inequality gap is widening. Nigeria and other African countries currently being exploited. If you go to Northwest, for instance, where you have gold reserve, we see people mining gold unregulated, illegally. And we see a lot of time jets without authorization land in airstrip and take this gold. And sometimes, I did follow the money around gold mining, and I followed the gold from Nigeria to Morocco to even Dubai in the UAE. And the president is simply saying, we need a new pact. We need a new pact that works for the world, that Nigeria and other African countries can tap into. And, he also talked about debt forgiveness, or what you call debt, taking away those debt burden. Because debt burden is currently killing us. We're carrying that huge debt on our shoulders. But I think, like you said, when he points that finger, Thor is pointing at us. One, we need leadership that leads by example. So do we still have budget leakages? Today we say we need to cut the cost of governance. What is his bold step and action around cutting, cost of governance? Because he removes fuel subsidy. People are dealing with multiple inflation and economic hardship. So I think Mr. President, again, is saying, okay, we need a pact around security because, and migration, what can we do as partners? So he's bold, but I think we need to also internalize all of this. So Nancy, we don't even have a singular currency in the sub-region, let alone even the continent. Yes, there's the Africa Free Trade Agreement, but how is it operationalized? And how is this bringing prosperity? If I want to go to South Africa, for instance, Nancy.
Yes, I'm there. I
can hear me?
You. I can hear you loud and clear. Yes.
So for instance, if I want to go to South Africa, it takes forever to get a visa approval. And I'm an African. So again, how do we even see ourselves as Africans? How do the Northern Africa, deal with the Western Africa? Or, how do the Eastern Africa deals with Southern Africa? Because for us as African Union, let's even take a stock. Let's take a pause and take a step back. What have we achieved as ECOWAS? What have we achieved as African Union? And in all of these countries where military junta has toppled democratically elected government, what was the sanction on them? How did we even enforce this sanction? So I think we need to take ourselves first seriously before the world will take us serious. And we're supposed to be a superpower or a global power to become a force within the different parts and the different blocks. And if we don't take ourselves serious, and in taking ourselves serious, it must be centered around citizens. What is the value of life? What are the social amenities that we enjoy? What is the social security that we enjoy? Do we have access to quality education, quality healthcare? Do we have roof over our head? So again, I think that beyond the speech, Mr. President has to follow through with action, but he must focus on Nigeria. And, our foreign policy actually talks about, putting Africa first, which I now understand why he has to speak on behalf of, the continent. But I think as Nigerians, we must reflect. We must deal with our identity crisis. We must invest in human capital development. But most importantly, it must be centered around transparency and accountability and open government, where there is inclusion. So what is the role of women, people with disability, young people in politics, in governance that shapes public policy and ensure that Nigeria takes ownership, whatever policy Mr. President is going to lead in his administration?
Of course, the president said that Nigeria is indeed open for business, but how much of the world is truly open to doing business with Nigeria? That's a question he really posed out there. Hamzat, you talked about debt forgiveness earlier, and there's mixed feelings around debt forgiveness. You know what happened years ago where Madam Okonjo-Iweala was able to secure that for us, and I don't know if the rest of the world will really be open in terms of forgiving our debt right now, despite that we have 3 people at least within the global space. Okonjo-Iweala as WTO DG, we have Akinwumi Adesina Dr. Additional as AFDB, then the Deputy Secretary General of the UN. So you're seeing Nigerians occupying global space. But the issue there is, how did we even get here? The recklessness of spending as a way, and spending on frivolous things that got us to this place. In terms, I'm just asking concerning what you mentioned earlier around debt forgiveness. Then secondly is the issue around SDGs, Hamzat. We have about 7 years down the line. I guess you're also in New York to attend some of the meetings on the sidelines around SDGs, poverty eradication, good pipe-borne water, all of them, education, and all of that. Yet Nigeria is still lagging behind. What are the sentiments concerning this? And do you think there's still a commitment for us to meet, I don't want to say all the all the indices there for the SDGs? How are we doing so far? And is that renewed commitment?
So Nancy, I'm glad you talked about Madam Amina J. Mohammed.
Yes, go ahead, Amsad. I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about Madam Amina J. Mohammed. I'm glad you talked about Dr. Akim Ambodi and Madam Gonzum Konjawela. And I think Mr. President has to cash on this opportunity. He needs to set up a global team that works with a national team to lead a global campaign on debt forgiveness. See, Nancy, the last time the money we generated, over 90% went into debt services. But I think for Mr. President to show commitment and leadership, he needs to recover some of these assets or some of these resources that were stolen. What happened to Paris Club refund, for instance? Because if he's talking to world leaders and our global partners, both multilaterals, and say, forgive our debt, he needs to also show that he has recovered some of the stolen assets and he's showing where he's going to invest it. I've always argued that, yes, we'll remove subsidy. Where is the savings going to go to? Mr. President needs to come clear and say, oh, it's going to education. Because when you look at output, early grade reading is still an issue in the country. So if we want to achieve SDGs, we need to show, oh, we're investing in healthcare, in education, in human capital development, in creating jobs and value. So Mr. President needs to take a step further beyond the speech and put together a global compact where you have Madam Amina Mohammed, Dr. Akinwumi, and Madam Ngozi Nkonjo-Iweala lead from that global front. But we must build trust in doing this. What do I mean? We must strengthen institutions. We must also show clear commitment on transparency and accountability, and also communicate if these debts are forgiven, what would we use our own resources to do? Because everybody is looking internally. From the impact of COVID-19 and the aftermath of COVID-19, there are dwindling inflow in the country. And, I'm glad you talked about India, and then Mr. President did a stopover at UAE. A lot of foreign direct investment, or investors rather, would bring him effects. How can you guarantee that they can actually pull over their returns or their profit in effect back to any economy they want to do? So you must provide confidence. Your economy must be robust in a way that it provides public confidence, whereby as they bring in their effect in billions of dollars, as Mr. President is also wooing investors, he must also show that these investors will make profit, but most importantly, they can repatriate their profits to other economy or even back to their own country. Now the SDGs. Yeah. When we take stock on the SDGs, we've not done well. We've not really done well in achieving this sustainable development goal. One is because we've not localized the SDGs. Yes, we have a budget that informs what the government agenda is, but this budget is not being tied to the framework of the SDGs deliverables. And I think Mr. President needs to reflect and say, what are the gaps? What are the opportunities? And data must be centered around it. Because if you have data, you get robust data, and you make informed decision with data, what it means is you're tackling it heads on. We're talking about, inclusion in terms of gender inclusion. We're talking about ending poverty and hunger. Nancy, over 60 million people go to bed hungry. You want to build economic growth. First, provide security. And in talking about security and tying it to the SDGs, what is the role of the Nigerian police? I've always argued that, we should change the name of the Nigerian police force to the Nigerian Police Service. And I believe that we have good men and women in the Nigerian police force because, see, we're talking about building confidence in public institutions. I'm a proud product of public education, public primary school, secondary school, and university. But today, do we have that level of confidence in our public institution? Are we investing in teachers? Are we investing on the men and women that makes you and I go to bed and keep our eyes closed, sleeping in the night, keeping us safe? So we need to invest all this money in human capital development, public institutions, rebuild back public trust. And this would also help us in changing the mindset, because the mindset and perception about various institutions goes a long way. And that has to be a behavioral change. As a country and as a people, we need to tie into a collective vision that allows us to the pathway, will put us in the pathway in achieving the SDGs. Yes, we have from now to 2030. I believe that Mr. President, like he has said, and I'm quoting him, I asked for the job and I'm prepared for it. So we're going to hold him to account, but we as a people must play our role in supporting government policy, popularizing it, and tying it to achieving the Sustainable Development Goal. And by the way, he just reappointed Princess Ajejoke, who is his SSA on SDGs.
Yes, I think there have been a few reappointments too. The former special advisor on PEBEC has also been returned. And of course, we have a special advisor economic matters now, Dr. Tokpe Fashua. So let's see what happens with this category of people around him. And talking about security also, you talked about the police force or even our security force, our security operatives. I don't know if you also heard the news, what happened in Imo State. So my heart really goes out to them. In the state, especially to the families of those that have lost loved ones, where gunmen gunning down security operatives. And I hope that Governor Zodima really does what he should do to bring those people to justice. If gunmen can be killing our security operatives, where does it leave the rest of us? But thank you very much, Hamzat, for joining us. You can go back to bed now, and we'll talk later.
Well, thank you very much, Nancy, and all the best in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you.